All right, so we are moving on auxiliary services. Out of any chapter I cover this week, this is the most important. What I tried to do, I tried to take the Guthrie text and relate it to things that were Oklahoma specific, really because I learned how absolutely crazy the transportation system is here compared to other states, and it is. You have to realize something that is shocking to me because I'm coming from this with a background that I know school finance, I know national school finance. District transportation is highly regulated in Oklahoma, and all of you know that. School security is not regulated in Oklahoma. It's regulated less than transportation. You have a lot more autonomy on school security than you do in this state, but transportation is freaking ridiculous. So if you get to be in a superintendent position, just know that the regulations you have for district transportation are pretty rough. But I also think it's because most of the school districts actually own their own buses and own their own transportation system. I am not used to that. I'm used to subcontracted in the Northeast, and I know in Florida runs on a county system. That's what I'm looking at right now. In Florida actually subcontracts out where the county owns the buses and then they distribute them according to the districts. Here, how many of you are in districts where the district owns the buses? That's crazy to me, and I think that's why the transportation regulations are as big as they are. So, you have to make different make these decisions if you're appointed positions in Central Min. If you're going to a smaller school district, you do these yourself, when it comes to accountability. The other, this chapter also looks at law and human resources. One of the other things that I do want to stress is that state and federal regulations are increasing, which means that insurance costs are increasing as well. You're going to be paying a lot on if there is let's say there's an active shooter in your building, and the school was liable and people sued the school district. The insurance cost for preservation and also settlements is huge now in districts. It is going up, it is increasing tremendously. So these are costs that you might not have been prepared for. In insurance in the state of Oklahoma is pretty bad anyway because the disaster insurance on schools is expensive as well, and that's something that you have to know. And some districts will gamble, and the Lewis book actually talks about gambling with disaster insurance, whether you take it or you don't take it, and some districts do, some districts don't. And you know that we've had superintendents who have elected not to take it in this state, and we've kind of seen what's happened with that. So this is odd to me because the district owns the buses, which you all know in most cases, but the state regulates the transportation system. And you need to know that. That's very, very, very weird. So you apply to be a bus driver through the state, and then the school essentially subcontracts them out. That's different if you go to another state. Now, Tanya, if you're interested in looking at policies over the course of states, make a note to yourself that this is really weird. This is not the way that it is in other states. Most of the other states, you want to be a bus driver, you apply to the district. The district has autonomy over hiring, but the district, but the state, you apply through the state to actually be a bus driver. So in case there is a problem, the state does have control, which is good, but it's also a little bit different. In a lot of other states, you can take a bus and drive it as an event as a teacher or principal. You might have heard in Oklahoma that there was a major legal issue with this about 6 months ago. And now, as state representatives, we are telling you not to do this anymore.
Without a CDL?
Without a CDL, do not do it.
Wow.
Do not do it. It is illegally, that is the legal perspective to give you. Do not drive yourself. And this is a school district. There was a teacher who crowded. Some of you might remember this because this is what caused it. Because we got this massive flood email about this. A teacher wanted to take their kids out to get food, and there was, there was also the case that that we did last semester. There was a teacher who took their kids out to get food for an after-school program, and she crammed 9 people into a car, and there was an accident, and that caused the state to say only people that are licensed bus drivers are the ones that are doing it. And I'm going to say something too, and this will be an Oklahoma State thing too. Kara's doing a lot of work with the Vietnamese population right now.
I was just going to ask you about that.
And she's doing it as her grad assistantship, but
internship.
It's her internship. But Valerie Venzel has to physically pay Kara to do it because Kara's driving the bus. So Oklahoma State has to give her a paycheck so that she's permitted to drive the bus.
Even though I'm doing
which
I'm
is,
doing the internship with her, but I'm also doing, with the school, I'm doing 20 hours as my grad assistantship. So I'm getting paid for both of them. And originally I wasn't supposed to be paid for
Yeah.
my internship until she realized that I have to be paid for it in order to be legally
allowed to drive the
student.
bus. So you need to know that if you're going to be put in a position where you're driving kids around, because the state stance is you should not under any circumstances. Now, honestly, I mean, I did just, you know, I was the musical choir director when I was a high school teacher, and I did I did the choir part of it. So we would take our kids to district choir and regional. So I'm thinking of you right now, Matt, and I'm sure you have 3 or 4 kids. You have to go to something that might be halfway across the state. Do you really have time to charter a bus? You know, I don't know. I mean, the worry about this is, and this is straight from the state, you can be held accountable civilly. Now,
So are you talking about, what if I wanted to take some kids somewhere and I don't have my CDL, but I use a school minivan?
if you use a school minivan, that's different than a school bus.
Okay.
The school bus, where you don't
I'm
have...
not driving a bus.
Well, okay, that's cool, that's cool.
John can drive me around.
Yeah.
But
So-
if I wanted to drive, if I needed to take 4 kids to get a scholarship lunch,
Yes, you
I
are.
could do that
Yes.
without a CDL, driving
Without a
the
CDL,
minivan.
driving
Okay.
them around, yes.
See, and that's like what I'm driving is technically a bus. It's a 15-passenger bus, and the thing is huge. It looks like, do you know those access buses for, they pick up elderly people? That's
Yeah.
what it looks like. It has a ramp and everything, but they don't call it that. They call it a van. So technically, I'm driving a van.
So that's, I mean, this is the issue, and the state stance on this is, the state is saying, to be on the safe side, as of right now, 2015, be careful, but it's going to be up to the individual district, and they haven't made a ruling on it yet. So that's the actual thing. I'm sure this is going to change in the next year or two, and that's what I think, that's where I think it is. But this is another thing that relates to this, which is also weird. The state publishes every year a training manual for school bus drivers. Like, it exists, it's online, and they change it every single year with new updated laws that state accountability. And the bus driver must be held accountable for. Like I said, the control on transportation here is a lot more than I expected, but school security is so loosey-goosey in the state that it's really different than what I'm used to, where basically transportation was something that was never worried about where I'm from, but school security was a higher priority. So just understand too that there's a training manual the bus drivers have to have, and you might be responsible for the dissemination of that as well. So one of the things that the book talks about that I see frequently is this idea of bid sharing and subcontracting, where the district will actually sell out their unused buses, unused vehicles, and subcontract them out to other school districts. If this is good and your district is permitted to do this, you can make a lot of money from this, and you can use it for other funds, which is good. And the Lewis book goes over, and I have some stuff pulled on what you can use buses for and what you can't, and where money can go to. But what I found was interesting is if you subcontract out, if you need, let's say John wants to put in his building, or actually I'll use Matt because it's a more egregious example. Let's say Matt wants to get 5 new tubas and 4 new bassoons. And his way of doing it is he's the superintendent, and he says, I want that for the band, so I'm going to subcontract out school buses. You can, and you can take that money and put it in the activities fund. That's legal and that's transferable in the state, which is odd, but you can do it. And that's good, so if you have a bus and you can subcontract it out, you could actually privatize it and use it as an investment procedure. And not a lot of states can do that. So obviously, there's downsides of private management or a management company because the local system doesn't have control, the quality of service could be compromised, there could be accountability. So when you're doing that, if one of the districts, if Tulsa Public Schools wants to go to surrounding smaller schools and subcontract out buses, yet they don't meet their end of the bargain, then you got issues between them. But that's actually considered a private sector of auxiliary management if they're subcontracting out. But I'll go over that a little bit more in the Lewis one. I have a lot on that. So business managers have 4 wicked problems. These are what they will spend all of their time dealing with. I would argue facilities and maintenance come first, but transportation services is also in their hands, school security and food services is in their hands as well. And the districts have to address them equally and appropriately as needed to kind of have that transparency and accountability. So auxiliary services matter more for school safety. And it's also on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it would be in either the physiological needs or the safety and security needs. And what Guthrie argues that I think is important is if the kids aren't getting the meals they're supposed to have or kept safe, you have to cut elsewhere. This comes first. These things, transportation, facilities and maintenance, school security, and food, have to come above everything else, and that's why they're wicked problems. I pity all of you that have to deal with the new food initiatives in your schools, because they're crazy and they're going to be so freaking costly for you. And all of you know this that are experiencing this. I mean, it's costing a lot more money for school meals. You know, things that used to be, you know, whether they were healthy or good or not, that were 8 or 9 cents a day, you're looking now at a much higher expense. That adds up when you're dealing with, you know, thousands of students a day. Outsourcing reduces overhead and cost, and it's good for the organization, but you have to make sure that it doesn't sacrifice in terms of quality. Oklahoma tends to be against outsourcing in the larger districts, but for it in the smaller districts. That tends to be consistent across the state. In everything that I've read from the School Boards Association, they prefer when smaller districts team up, but for larger districts, they prefer everything to be done in-house. Because as a whole, it saves on money and it saves on autonomy and responsibility. So, transportation services, I kind of gave you the Oklahoma perspective, but I'll give you, you know, our what they do. Obviously, you move students to and from school. You have traffic, rural locations. It can be a problem because of poorly designed roads. Most important decision you make as a superintendent is what? Whether or not to, if you're in a rural district, what is that decision that you have to make that's the one that could get you on the news if you do it bad? If there's a snowstorm, whether or not to
have school.
Cancel school or not. And in your rural districts, that's a really, really, really tough decision. Being here and seeing Stillwater, you know, when there is snow, as infrequently as it is, the entire town does shut down. And that can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing, but at least there's a consistent approach, and I think that's good. If the bus can't make it to pick the student up and the parent goes to work, the district can be held accountable, and that can be a problem as well. In some locations, urban areas, if the school doesn't provide transportation, the students don't come to school. This is also fascinating to me, because I didn't think of this, and how Oklahoma looks at it, it was crazy to me. Mobile classrooms actually fall under a transportation budget if they're mobile classrooms, because they're rented and they're temporary housing units, and they fall under transportation. But what I've seen in mobile classrooms, I've seen them actually be more modern than school buildings prior to renovations. They put a lot of money into those, and they might not have connectedness to the building, but they are more modern. But then it gets into the other question that I have, because there are a lot of districts that are using these mobile classrooms. How do you ensure the safety and security of students? They might be going from outside from one location to the mobile classroom, or what if something happened? And I don't have an answer for that, so I don't know what to do. So districts are requiring seatbelts in certain states. Remember what we say about all of this stuff. This is all basically a state function. So research has shown that students on school buses do need seatbelts. What's Oklahoma's ruling on this?
Don't need them.
They don't require
Don't need them. Not required. Not yet. When Oklahoma does require it, where are they going to require it first? What's been the move?
Special ed.
Special ed, smaller buses. So we are saying right now it's not required. What Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Maine have done, and they're piloting this, is they've grandfathered the law in. If they charter a new bus, it must have seatbelts. And this is a state function, it is not a federal or national function. I doubt, this is me personally, I doubt this is going to make its way to Oklahoma or Texas, but the New England states are doing this. So if you're a superintendent and you need actually something to look at for comparative purposes, Massachusetts is doing it, Connecticut's doing it, and Maine's doing it, but think about the scope and sequences of those states compared to Oklahoma and Texas. You know, you're looking at 20 or 30 school districts versus, 500 and 800. So I doubt it will make its way here. So we give you the questions related to transportation. Obviously these are stuff that, you can think about on your own. Private carriers, the one thing that they did mention was that with private carriers, there's no large investment. When they talk about private contracted carriers, they talk about it that for more for after-school needs than anything else. For athletics and extracurriculars. Are any of you guys using private contractors for your transportation after school? Yeah, no, nothing yet? Okay. And some districts are starting to do this back in other states. I know Texas is piloting this in some ways, and it's allowing them not to pay employees as much, and it keeps the extracurriculars. When I asked Dr. Crum about this, though, she said that she found out in her time at being in the state, and you guys can tell me if this is true or not, that most of the bus drivers actually scream and volunteer to ride buses to the extracurriculars because they make more money. Has that been your experiences? Like they want to be the ones that are doing it and they're bidding on it?
They get paid by the hour.
Yes, okay, all right. I'm checking because that's slightly different than the context I'm coming from. So, obviously, district-owned systems, if you're going to make a note of anything, this is what we're seeing in Oklahoma. The district owns most of the carriers. That's different for me. I'm not used to that, so it's interesting to see that, and I think that actually leads itself to a nice study over time for feasibility and cost, and it's something I'd be interested in looking at. The general rule is this. If the transportation cost is invested in upfront, it will save money. If you buy district-owned transportation, it saves the district money in the long run. So if you want to be a career superintendent and you invest in transportation costs in your first couple of years, you can really cut down on costs the next few years. And then the other, this is part of a strategic plan. You're coming into a district, you're going to be the superintendent, you will inevitably save the district money using district-owned carriers. So, routing. The district should have a pre-designed route. You know that sometimes this changes. During the summer months, we suggest you do a test drive with the transportation manager, see if there are any potential problems or hiccups in the route. I would say this would be more in your, your suburban, your rural districts, not your urban or suburban districts, to make sure that the kids are going to get picked up in the right time and in the right schedule. Road quality can be an issue. Obviously, there are massive construction issues. We were driving, we met Dr. Curry today at Andolini's for lunch, and getting from here to there, it's 2.6 miles. It took us 20 minutes because of that bridge construction. There's a lot of construction in this state when you get into the big cities. I'm not used to, that's another thing I'm not used to. Like Ohio was loaded with it, Pennsylvania not so much, but so that can impact school and that can impact routing and weather. Have a plan in terms of the weather, and if you're left with a tough decision, you're always better off canceling. That's the rule of thumb, and any law professor will tell you that. If you're on the fence, you cancel. You act first. You apologize later. You don't send the kids to school. You are better off canceling, and I can't think of any superintendents that would tell you otherwise. So, how many of you actually have worked with your bus drivers and seen that they can actually relate to students? How many of you think your bus drivers can? Okay. Do you have the same bus driver that you take to all your band events?
Usually we'd have the same group.
Okay.
So like, when we would take 7 buses, usually we'd have hopefully pretty close to the same 7 drivers every time.
And so they're used to kids singing and being crazy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they can at least relate to children. So, supervision is still the responsibility of the school administrator and the superintendent. But if the bus driver screws up, it can end up in the hands of the superintendent. At this state, too, the accountability piece, if there's a problem with transportation, is not at the building level, it's at central administration level. And that's some districts that are community schools, it's different, but that's right in the Lewis book. The accountability is at the central level, not the building level. So food service, I don't mark this, but this is important. Food service, obviously, who controls food service? Is that, who are you answering to? For transportation, you're answering at the state. Food service, you answer at the federal level. Food service is a federal condition, and it is a federal level because of the Healthy Schools Initiative. Some districts cannot afford it, and that's quite frankly the truth. So the thing that I've always argued, being me and being just the cynical human being in general, you have no control over what students eat at home to begin with. You really don't. So by saying you're going to regulate food and make schools healthier, it's a noble cause, but I haven't seen any statistics or figures that show that it's working. Has anybody seen anything that's really shown an actual feasible study that shows me that changing schools and making them healthier has worked? I would love a study. Anybody have anything to give me? Okay, that's what I thought, and we've been doing this since 2008. So the one thing that the reason why